In the summer of 1990, in a small, quiet town tucked away in the Midwest, a teenage girl named Emily Barnes kissed her dad goodbye before heading off to school and was never seen again. She was just 16, full of life, dreams, and the usual teenage worries. Her parents had no idea that morning would be the last time they'd see her. No one did. Her sudden disappearance left the entire community shaken. No clues, no leads, no goodbye, no just silence. The case made local headlines for weeks, then months. Volunteers searched the woods, flyers were stapled to every post, and detectives followed every possible tip. But nothing ever came of it. And over time, the noise faded. The world moved on, but her family never could. Emily's father, Richard Barnes, held on to hope in the quiet way that only a parent could. He kept her room exactly as she left it, down to the unmade bed and the notebook she scribbled in. Every year on her birthday, he'd sit by her window with a slice of her favorite cake, just in case she found her way back home. But as the years passed, the hope turned to something else, an ache that never went away, a shadow that lived in every corner of the house. The police declared her a missing person, presumed dead. Her case was marked inactive. But Richard never gave up, not fully. Then, 22 years later, something strange happened. It was a rainy Sunday afternoon. Richard was going through a box of old things in the attic, looking for a photo album to send to his niece. The box was full of dusty yearbooks, report cards, and bits of old school projects. It was a time capsule of Emily's life before everything changed. Flipping through one of the yearbooks from 1990, Richard paused. He was staring at the familiar photos of Emily and her classmates when something odd caught his eye on the page for the senior class of '92, 2 years after she vanished. There, in a sea of student portraits, was a girl who looked exactly like Emily. The same soft features, the same eyes, even the same small dimple on her left cheek. She looked older, more mature, but it was unmistakably her. Or was it? Richard froze. His hands trembled as he leaned in closer. The name printed under the photo didn't say Emily Barnes. It read Alicia Sanders. But the resemblance was too strong to ignore. Could it be that she had assumed a new identity? Could she still be alive somewhere? For Richard, that moment was like a jolt of electricity. After 2 decades of heartbreak and dead ends, he suddenly had something real. He took the yearbook to the police, but they dismissed it as coincidence. People can look similar, they told him. But Richard knew his daughter. He knew every line on her face. That was her. Unable to let it go, he began investigating the girl named Alicia Sanders himself. He combed through school records, newspaper, archives, and local directories. The more he looked, the more strange things he noticed. Alicia had transferred into the school mid-year, with no prior records from any other school. Her emergency contacts were vague. After graduation, there were no traces of her, no college applications, no social media, no job records. It was as if she vanished too. Richard's search began to stir up long-buried questions. Why would Emily change her name? Who was helping her? Was she in danger or running from it? And most disturbingly of all, what had happened to her that made her choose to disappear in the first place? As he dug deeper, Richard began noticing inconsistencies in the original investigation. Some police records were missing, and key witnesses from back then seemed hesitant to speak now. One former classmate said she remembered seeing Emily days after she was declared missing, but never reported it because she didn't want to get involved. Another person, a former teacher, recalled a girl matching Alicia's description being unusually guarded and secretive. Even as a teen, by now, Richard was starting to believe something much bigger was at play, something that had been kept quiet for a very long time. Meanwhile, questions started echoing across the town again. People who had moved on were suddenly forced to revisit old wounds. Was Emily kidnapped and brainwashed? Did she run away from something she couldn't face? Or had she been placed in some sort of witness protection that no one knew about? And, still, one photo from an old yearbook was all Richard had to go on. He began contacting the few people who had known Alicia. Most didn't remember much, but one former student mentioned that Alicia had once shared a story about growing up in a town that wasn't safe and that she had escaped something bad. When asked what that meant, the student just shrugged. She didn't like talking about the past. That's when Richard knew. He wasn't just chasing hope anymore. He was chasing the truth, and he was getting close. But the closer he got, the more dangerous it seemed. Anonymous calls started coming in. A man once followed him from the library to his house. Even his old neighbor, who used to work with the school district, warned him to stop digging. "Sometimes the past is buried for a reason," she whispered. But Richard had already lost his daughter once. He wasn't going to lose her again, not without knowing why. What he didn't expect was what he'd uncover next. Because buried deep in the school archives was one overlooked file. A document that had been misfiled for over 2 decades. And in that file was a name he hadn't heard in years. A name that would unlock a truth no one saw coming. What really happened to Emily Barnes? Why did she vanish in 1990? And who was trying so hard to keep that story buried? The answers were coming. But what Richard would discover next would not only change everything he believed about his daughter's disappearance, would also reveal a secret that shook the entire town. So stay with us, because the real story is just beginning. Richard sat alone in his dimly lit living room, the yearbook still resting open on his lap. He'd stared at the photo of Alicia Sanders for hours now. Every time he blinked, it felt like he was looking into Emily's eyes again. It was impossible to let it go. Somewhere deep in his gut, he knew this wasn't just a look-alike. This was his daughter. The problem was, no one else believed it. Not the local police. Not the private investigator he hired for a few weeks before the money ran dry. Not even his sister, who gently told him he was holding on to shadows. But Richard didn't care anymore. He had to keep going. That night, he couldn't sleep. Memories played in his mind like old home videos. Molly giggling at the kitchen table, running through the backyard with their dog. Writing poems in her notebook by the window. She had always been a curious, sensitive child. The kind who saw beauty in strange places. But during her last year, before vanishing, something had shifted. She had become quieter. Her smiles didn't last as long. Richard and his wife, Margaret, had chalked it up to normal teenage stress and she disappeared without a trace. Now, with this new lead, Richard began to revisit everything. He returned to Emily's high school the next day, requesting access to old student records, yearbooks, and staff directories. He wasn't sure what he was even looking for, just anything that could help him piece it all together. The woman at the front desk was polite but firm. "We don't give out personal student information, sir." He nodded, pretending to leave, but waited in the hallway until an older janitor passed by. Richard struck up a conversation, and within minutes, the man mentioned he'd been working there since the late 80s. He remembered Alicia Sanders. "She was a quiet girl," he said, lowering his voice. "Came in partway through junior year. Didn't mix much. Seemed scared of something. I always thought she was running from someone." That comment stuck in Richard's head. Running from someone. Could that be the key? Digging through old newspaper clippings at the town library, Richard found something he hadn't noticed before. A short article from 1991 about a minor fire. In the high school's records room, it was quickly put out. No one injured, but some paper files were lost. The date. Just a few weeks after Alicia Sanders showed up. Richard's heart pounded. Was it a coincidence or part of something more deliberate? Later that week, he tracked down the only known photo of Alicia outside the yearbook, a grainy shot of a school play taken by a parent. In it, she stood off to the side in a costume that didn't quite fit, half smiling, eyes down. The photo confirmed it. It wasn't just the face, it was the way she stood, the way she held her arms, even her nervous half-smile. That was Emily. It had to be. But why would she hide her identity? And who helped her do it? Richard found a name in the faculty listings that he remembered from long ago: Ms. Evelyn Marks, a guidance counselor who'd been particularly close to Emily. He hadn't thought about her in years. She'd left town shortly after Emily's disappearance, moving 3 states away. Richard found her number online and called. When she answered, her voice was cautious but kind. At first, she claimed not to remember Alicia Sanders. But when Richard brought up Emily by name, there was a long pause. "You're her father," she finally said. Her tone changed. "Mr. Barnes, I can't talk about this over the phone. It's not safe." "Not safe," Richard repeated, confused. "There are people who don't want this story told," she whispered. "People who made sure it stayed buried." She agreed to meet in person the following week, but Richard felt an uneasy chill settle in. What had Emily gotten involved in, and who had made it their mission to erase her existence? Back home, he began to reread the original police reports. One small note stood out, something that hadn't seemed important back then. A witness, a neighbor, had reported seeing a dark-colored van idling near the house in the days before Emily vanished. Police had followed up, but never found the vehicle. At the time, they thought it might have been coincidence. But now, in light of everything else, it felt more sinister. The more Richard investigated, the more the picture changed. What had once seemed like a tragic disappearance was beginning to look like something more calculated. Maybe Emily hadn't run away alone. Maybe she'd been helped to or Stu vanish. He also began to wonder about Margaret, Emily's mother, who had passed away just 5 years after their daughter went missing. She had carried her grief in silence, rarely speaking of Emily, refusing interviews and avoiding all public attention. But Richard remembered a moment now that seemed strange in hindsight. About a year after Emily vanished, Margaret had received a letter in the mail with no return address. She never showed it to Richard, but he remembered her crying for hours that day and locking it away in her jewelry box. After her death, Richard never found the letter. Had it been from Emily? As more puzzle pieces came together, Richard's world felt more unstable. He didn't know who to trust. Even people he'd known for years seemed distant now, hesitant. When he brought up his daughter, it was like her memory had become dangerous. Late one night, he received a message on his voicemail. A woman's voice, shaky and low. "Stop asking questions, Mr. Barnes. Let her go. It's better that way." The line went dead. He played the message over and over, his mind racing. Was it a warning or a threat? And who had sent it? Then, something even more unexpected happened. He received an envelope in the mail with no name, no return address. Inside was a single photograph, clearly aged. It showed Emily older, maybe in her 20s, standing near a lake, holding a small child. Her expression was calm, but guarded. On the back of the photo, written in neat, careful handwriting, were 3 words. "She's okay now." Richard felt his knees give out. This meant she hadn't just disappeared. She had lived, maybe even started a new life. But why did she never come back? Why stay hidden? And who took that photo, and why send it now? There were too many questions and no answers. But Richard knew he was close. He could feel it. The truth was out there. Someone had gone to great lengths to erase Emily's identity and bury her past. And now, after all this time, the past was beginning to surface again. What Richard didn't know was that the next person he'd speak to, an old friend of Alicia's, would change everything. And not everyone would be ready for what was about to come next. Richard stared at the photo for what felt like hours. Every part of him wanted to believe it was real that Emily had survived, that she was safe, and maybe even had a family now. But questions flooded his mind. Who sent the picture? Why now? After all these years? And most of all, if she really was okay, why hadn't she ever reached out? That question burned more than all the others. What could have kept his daughter away for over 2 decades? He placed the photo back into the envelope and locked it inside his desk drawer. Sleep didn't come that night. His thoughts drifted between the past and the present. Between his memories of Emily and the woman named Alicia who had somehow replaced her. The next morning, Richard kept his meeting with Evelyn Marks, the former school counselor who had known Emily before she disappeared. She met him at a small diner 2 towns over, her eyes tired, like someone carrying the weight of secrets for far too long. After a few minutes of nervous silence, she finally spoke. Emily came to me a few weeks before she disappeared. She was scared, Evelyn said quietly. She didn't say everything, but I knew something was wrong at home or maybe outside of it. She mentioned a man, someone who had been following her. At first, I thought it might be teenage imagination. But then she stopped showing up to class, and the next thing I knew, she was gone. Richard's heart sank. Why didn't you tell me? Or the police? Evelyn's eyes filled with guilt. I wanted to. But a few days later, I got a visit from someone who said they were with Child Protective Services. They asked about Emily's behavior, about her friends. Something felt off. They weren't taking notes, just watching me. Then the school had that fire, and suddenly all the counselor records from that semester were lost. After that, I was advised to keep quiet. Richard leaned forward. Advised by who? Evelyn shook her head. I don't know, but I left the school shortly after. I was scared. Still am, to be honest. Her confession opened a new door. Emily hadn't just vanished. Someone had helped cover it up, maybe even erased her on purpose. Back in town, Richard started reconnecting with Emily's old classmates. Many had moved on, but one name kept popping up: Sophie Keller, Emily's best friend before she vanished. She had been quiet. Back then, always in Emily's shadow. When Richard finally tracked her down, she was working as a nurse in a nearby city. She agreed to meet, and the moment she saw the photo of Alicia Sanders, her face went pale. I always wondered, Sophie whispered. That girl looked exactly like her, but no one wanted to talk about it. And when I asked around back then, people shut me out. Richard asked her if Emily had ever said anything unusual before she disappeared. Sophie hesitated, then nodded. Double quotes, she said, if anything ever happened to her, not to trust the obvious people. She didn't explain, but she was scared of someone. I remember once we were walking home from school, and a black SUV slowed down behind us. Emily grabbed my arm and pulled me into the nearest store. After that, she was always looking over her shoulder. Richard's mind raced. First a dark van near their house, now a black SUV. He went back through the old police notes and saw something he hadn't focused on before: mention of a local man named Harold Quinn who had once worked as a private security contractor. He had been questioned briefly at the time because someone claimed to see his vehicle near the Barnes Street. But no charges were filed, and the report noted he had powerful connections. Curious, Richard began digging into Quinn's background. What he found was strange. The man had ties to a now-defunct private firm that had done contract work for law enforcement and private clients in the late 80s and early 90s. The firm had been quietly investigated after being accused of helping relocate teens from troubled homes, sometimes under the direction of wealthy families or organizations. Could Emily have been taken under the guise of protection? Could someone have decided, without his knowledge, that she needed to be hidden away? The deeper Richard looked, the more tangled everything became. Then a second anonymous envelope arrived at his home. No photo this time, just a folded note. You're closer than you think. But if you keep pushing, others will get hurt. Let sleeping ghosts lie. The handwriting was the same as on the photo. That meant whoever was watching him was still close. Still watching, Richard began noticing odd things: his mail arriving already opened, unfamiliar cars parked near his home, clicks on his phone line. The tension was building fast, and he felt alone in it. But he couldn't stop now. Something much bigger than a missing person case was taking shape. Meanwhile, another subplot started to unfold when Richard reconnected with an old neighbor. Glenn Sanders, the same last name as Alicia, though he insisted it was coincidence. But Glenn had worked for the school district back in the early 90s. When asked about the fire in the records room, Glenn looked uncomfortable. That wasn't just a freak accident, he finally admitted. There was pressure to make some files disappear. We were told to shut up and move on. Richard pressed him, who gave the order. Glenn wouldn't say. Let's just say it didn't come from inside the school. It was clear now Millie's disappearance had never been a simple case of a runaway. Someone wanted her gone. Someone with the resources to erase records, threaten witnesses, and bury evidence. As more clues came in, a chilling possibility began forming in Richard's mind. What if Emily had witnessed something she wasn't supposed to? Something dangerous. What if her disappearance was less about escape and more about survival? But if that were true, who was she hiding from? And why had someone suddenly started sending him pieces of the puzzle now? Each discovery only raised more questions. The mystery wasn't unraveling, it was thickening. And Richard was running, out of people to trust. What he didn't yet know was that someone else was watching the investigation unfold. Someone who knew the real story behind Alicia Sanders, and they were about to step out of the shadows for the first time in over 2 decades, but not to help. To stop him. Rain hit the roof in steady beats as Richard sat in his car parked outside a dark, quiet building on the edge of town. It used to be a private therapy center, now abandoned. It had popped up in an old file Glenn had reluctantly passed on. In the early 90s, the center had discreetly handled special cases, involving minors, cases often tied to wealthy clients who wanted problems handled quietly. One of the names listed on the old payroll, Harold Quinn. Richard tightened his grip on the steering wheel. It all kept circling back to the same people, the same shadows from decades ago. Emily, or Alicia, whatever name she was using, had been pulled into something carefully designed to disappear her. But why? That still haunted him. Whatever she saw, or whatever she knew, someone had made sure it never saw daylight. That night, Richa broke into the old center through a back window. The building was cold, the air thick with dust and silence. In the basement, he found a filing cabinet, rusted shut but breakable. Inside were only a few folders, most of them water-damaged, but one caught his attention. It wasn't labeled with a name, just a case number and a hand-scribbled word: relocated. Inside were intake notes, forms with half-redacted names, and a psychological evaluation dated 6 months after Emily vanished. The notes described a teenage girl, approx. 16 years old, referred by an unnamed external agency. It mentioned she had severe anxiety, memory lapses, and fear of returning to previous environment. The subject was assigned a new name, Alicia. Richard felt his stomach drop. This wasn't a coincidence. This was her. Someone had institutionalized Emily under a new identity. Not for her safety, but to erase her. As Richard flipped through the remaining documents, he noticed a page with initials at the bottom: E.M. Evelyn Marks. Had she known more than she let on? The next morning, Richard called Evelyn again, pressing harder. She hesitated before admitting there had been pressure from outside groups. They said it was for her own good, she whispered. They said she needed to disappear for her safety. But from who? Richard asked. I don't know for sure, she replied. But there was a man who kept showing up to check on her, even after the transfer. He never gave his name. Just said he was part of a private risk management group. He was calm, polished, but there was something cold in his eyes. I still remember him. Richard's mind jumped to the warning letter, the anonymous photo, the voice on the phone. Whoever had orchestrated Emily's disappearance had money, power, and time on their side. But now they were starting to panic because someone inside was cracking. Someone had sent him that photo. Someone wanted the truth to come out, even if it meant risking everything. Then came a breakthrough he didn't expect. Sophie Keller called late that night. Her voice trembled as she said, I think I found her. Richard's heart skipped. What do you mean? I work in a hospital, she said. A few days ago, a woman came in with her daughter. The woman looked familiar. Then I saw her signature, a Sanders. She looked like an older Emily. Same smile, same scar near her ear. But when I asked if we'd met before, she shut down. She left quickly, didn't even finish the paperwork. Where was this? Richard asked, already reaching for his keys. A clinic on the edge of Dayton. I checked the system. There's no insurance file. Just a cash payment and a PO. Box for contact. Dayton, a city 2 hours away. Close enough to stay hidden. Far enough to avoid bumping into people from the past. Richard drove through the night, his fingers wrapped tightly around the steering wheel. Every mile felt heavier. Was he really about to find her? Or would this just be another dead end? He reached the clinic just after sunrise. It was small, tucked behind a strip mall. The receptionist said she couldn't give him patient information. But Richard handed her a photo of Emily as a teenager and asked, voice low and urgent, have you seen anyone who looks like her? Maybe older now. The woman glanced at the photo, then looked up slowly. I'm not supposed to say anything, but yes, she's been here before. Richard's pulse raced. When was the last time? A few days ago. She seemed nervous, said she didn't want to be found. Before he could ask more, the woman hesitated, then scribbled something on a sticky note and slid it across the counter. She left this behind. It's not much, but maybe it means something. It was a torn envelope with part of a return address. It's just enough to point toward a nearby neighborhood. Richard didn't wait. He drove straight there, the streets narrowing as he got closer to the edge of the town. Finally, he stopped in front of a small house, overgrown with ivy and partially hidden behind a fence. He got out of the car, heart pounding. Every step toward the door felt heavier than the last. The windows were drawn. No sign of movement. Then footsteps. Behind him, Richard turned, startled, as a man in a black jacket stepped from behind a tree. You need to stop, the man said. His voice was calm but firm. She doesn't want to be found. Who are you? Richard demanded. That doesn't matter. Walk away. I won't. The man took a step forward. You're going to get her hurt. You have no idea what's at stake. She's my daughter, Richard said, his voice steady. I've already lost everything. I'm not leaving without answers. For a long moment, the man stared at him. Then, he slowly reached into his coat and handed Richard another photo, more recent. It showed Emily holding the hand of a young girl, walking along a park path. Her face was older, but unmistakably hers. She built a life, the man said. Not just for herself, for her daughter. Richard's breath caught. A granddaughter. He had a granddaughter. Then why the threats? Why the secrecy? He asked, voice shaking. The man didn't answer. He simply turned and walked away, disappearing. Down the road like a ghost, Richard stood frozen at the doorstep. Behind that door, a life existed that had been hidden for 22 years. Love, pain, fear, all tangled up in silence. And now it was right on the edge of being exposed. He raised his hand slowly and knocked inside the house. Someone moved, and just as the door creaked open, the past came rushing back all at once. But what would she say? Would she even open the door all the way? Or would the truth stay buried one moment longer? The answers were seconds away. But the story wasn't over yet. The door opened just a crack barely wide enough for Richard to see the outline of a woman standing behind it. She didn't speak right away. Her eyes, partly hidden in shadow, studied him like she was trying to recognize a dream she'd trained herself to forget. Then, slowly, her face came into view. Time had softened some features and deepened others, but it was her, Emily. No doubt. She looked tired, cautious, and older than her years. But she was alive, right in front of him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Dad. Her voice was barely a whisper. The word hung between them like a fragile thread. Richard stepped back, overwhelmed. Emily. Then she closed the door. Just like that, closed it. Locked it. He stood there, stunned, unsure whether to knock again or walk away. He didn't move. After nearly 23 years of not knowing whether his daughter was dead or alive, she was here, and she had shut him out. He understood the fear, the instinct to protect whatever life she'd managed to build. But the ache in his chest was unbearable. After several minutes, the door opened again, slowly, this time. Emily stepped outside, wearing a coat now, arms crossed tightly. Her eyes were red. "You can't be here," she said quietly. "It's not safe." Richard stepped forward. "Emily, I don't want to hurt you. I just need to understand. I've searched for you every single day. I have so many questions." She looked around nervously, then pulled him by the arm toward the backyard. "We can't talk here. They still watch the house." "They?" Richard's voice dropped. She nodded, but didn't elaborate. Behind the house was a small garden, mostly weeds, and a plastic bench near a shed. She sat. Richard joined her, his hands still shaking. "I wanted to reach out," she said. "So many times, but if I did, they said they'd take her from me." "Your daughter?" he asked. She nodded. "Her name's Lily. She's 11. She's everything." Richard swallowed hard. "Emily, who are they? It's been keeping you quiet all these years." She looked at him, and for the first time, he saw the fear wasn't just in her eyes, was in her bones. "It started. Before I vanished, I saw something. Something I wasn't supposed to see." "What did you see?" "I was walking home from school. Took the shortcut near the old train yard. I saw two men dragging someone into a van. First, I thought it was a fight, but then I saw the gun and the badge. One of them was a cop." Richard's breath caught. "I went to the school counselor, Ms. Marks," Emily continued. "I didn't want to go to the police, but someone must have overheard. A week later, I started getting followed. Notes in my locker. Threats. I told Ms. Marks again, and she said she'd take care of it. Then someone from an organization showed up at school. Said they'd relocate me, make me safe." "You agreed to leave?" Richard asked, still trying to process. "I was scared. I thought it would be temporary. I thought they'd talk to you, but they didn't. They said if I ever tried to contact my family, they'd say I was mentally unstable and take me into custody. I was 16. I didn't know what else to do." Richard's fists clenched. "They took you from your own life, lied to you, lied to us. And they're still out there," Emily said. "I've been living off the grid for years. No real ID, no job that reports income. They monitor everything. When I had Lily, they started watching again. They made it clear if I ever tried to find you, they'd take her." Richard tried to speak, but his voice broke. The full weight of what his daughter had endured came crashing down on him. Years stolen, a childhood erased, and a constant threat hanging over her and now his granddaughter. "I got the photo," he said. "And the note? Was that from you?" Emily shook her head slowly. "No, I didn't send anything." "I don't know who did." Richard froze. That meant someone else was out there. Someone who knew Emily's identity. Someone who had access to personal photos. And who had now revealed her location. "Do you think they're watching again?" he asked. "I don't think," she said. "I know." That's when a loud snap echoed from the front yard. Both of them jolted to their feet. Emily grabbed his arm and pulled him back toward the house. A black SUV was now parked across the street. Tinted windows, engine idling. Richard's chest tightened. "Is that them?" "I've seen that vehicle before," she said. "Years ago, and again last month." Richard's instincts kicked in. "You need to leave. You and Lily." Emily nodded. "I've been planning it. But they always seem one step ahead. They must have someone on the inside. Someone feeding them everything." That's when the second twist landed like a punch as they slipped back inside. Richard noticed a framed photo on a shelf near the stairs. It was a picture of Lily with her teacher and older woman smiling warmly with a hand on Lily's shoulder. Something about her seemed familiar. He leaned in closer. It was Evelyn Marks, the same school counselor who had claimed to help Emily vanish. The same woman who said she was being watched. She was here, in Emily's current life, as Lily's teacher. Richard looked back at Emily. "Did you know Evelyn is here? She teaches at Lily's school?" Emily turned pale. "No, that's not possible. It's her." And just like that, everything shifted again. Evelyn hadn't just been a part of Emily's past. She was still connected, still close. Maybe watching, maybe protecting, or maybe something worse. Richard realized they weren't just dealing with an old cover-up. This was something active, ongoing, and the people involved were embedded deeper than he ever imagined. Someone had pulled Emily out of her old life under the guise of protection. Someone had created the name Alicia Sanders, given her a new identity, and kept her silent. But someone else, or maybe the same person, was now back in their lives, close enough to touch Lily, close enough to control everything. The stakes weren't just high, they were terrifying. Richard knew now that the truth, whatever it was, went far beyond a single missing girl. And someone out there would do anything to make sure the truth never came out, not even if it meant silencing Emily or her father. The storm hadn't passed, it had only just begun. The air in the room felt thick as Richard and Emily stood frozen, staring at the photo of Lily with Evelyn Marks. There was no denying it now. Evelyn, the one who had once promised to protect Emily, hadn't just reappeared by coincidence. She was involved, but why? And more importantly, what did she want? Emily's voice shook. "She was supposed to be gone. I thought she moved states years ago. She told me. She said it was safer that way." Richard couldn't shake the unease crawling up his spine. "We need answers, and not from a distance, from her directly." Emily hesitated, but after a moment, she nodded. "Tomorrow's Friday. Lily has class. Evelyn will be there." The next morning came faster than either of them expected. Richard parked 2 streets away from the small school in Dayton where Lily was enrolled. Emily walked Lily to the front doors as usual, trying to keep calm. Nothing could appear out of place. Inside, she handed Lily off to her classroom assistant. Then, she turned toward the faculty hall. Evelyn Marks was in her office, seated behind a desk littered with books and printed worksheets. She looked older, thinner, but her expression hadn't changed. When she looked up and saw Emily standing there, her smile faded. "Well," Evelyn said softly, "I was wondering when this moment would come." Emily stepped inside, closing the door behind her. You're teaching my daughter." "I know," Evelyn replied. Richard appeared next, stepping in quietly behind Emily. Evelyn's eyes flickered to him, but she didn't act surprised. "I suppose you figured most of it out," Evelyn said, folding her hands on the desk. "Not all of it," Richard said. "Like why? Why her? Why the lies? Why stay close?" Evelyn looked down. "Because I couldn't walk away." She stood and moved to the window. "Back then, when Emily came to me, I really did want to help. She was smart, kind, terrified. I didn't know what she'd seen. But I knew someone wanted her gone." "So you let them take her?" Richard asked, bitterness creeping in. "No," Evelyn said sharply. "I made a deal. I convinced them to let me oversee the relocation myself. I created Alicia Sanders. I handled her transfer, found her a new home. I stayed close, watched from a distance, and made sure no one got too close." Emily shook her head. "You let me believe I was alone." Evelyn's voice cracked. "I had to. If you knew I was watching, you'd try to contact your father, and that would have put all of you at risk, including Lily." Richard stepped closer. "Who were you protecting her from?" Evelyn finally turned around, her eyes tired and wet. "Not just corrupt cops. The man Emily saw, he wasn't arresting anyone. He was kidnapping someone. And not for money, he was working with a network that moved people. Women, girls." Emily stumbled on a drop-off site used by someone inside law enforcement and a private security firm. "I knew if she spoke, they'd kill her." Richard's heart pounded. "That's why the school records were destroyed. Why no one helped." Evelyn nodded. "I tried to report it to the state once. 2 weeks later, my house was broken into. My phone line tapped. After that, I played along. I built a system around Emily, one where she'd disappear in plain sight, and for a while, it worked. Emily stepped back, till it didn't. Someone sent my father a photo. Someone new." Evelyn hesitated. Then she walked to her desk, pulled out a folder, and opened it. Inside was the same photo of Emily and Lily in the park, and a second one this time of Richard at the library weeks earlier. "They're watching all of us," Evelyn said. "I didn't send the photos, but I know who did." Before she could continue, a crash echoed from down the hallway, followed by the unmistakable slam of a door. Evelyn's face dropped. "They're here." Richard grabbed Emily's hand, and the three of them moved fast through the back exit of the school, slipping out into the alley behind the building. But two figures had already emerged from a black SUV across the street, heading their way. Just then, a second car screeched around the corner, a silver sedan. The passenger door swung open, and a voice yelled, "Get in!" Richard recognized the voice. "Glenn Sanders, move!" Evelyn shouted, and they jumped in. Glenn hit the gas as the SUV behind them sped forward. For a few terrifying minutes, it became a chase through the quiet streets. But Glenn took back roads, weaving through side alleys and underpasses, until finally, they reached an old barn on the edge of town, isolated and shielded by trees. Inside, Glenn pulled the emergency brake and turned to them. "They've been closing in. You stirred everything up again." "We don't have much time." "Who are they?" Richard asked. Evelyn sighed. "A group that started as a private task force. They were meant to handle trafficking leads quietly. But it got twisted. Over time, they stopped reporting to anyone. And now they do business for the highest bidder." "They've been using children," Glenn added. And Emily wasn't the only one who saw. That's when Evelyn opened the final folder and handed it to Richard. Inside were dozens of names, photos, girls listed as relocated. Some marked as deceased, others as active risk. And at the top of the list, Emily Barnes. "They marked you as a threat," Evelyn said. "But if we expose them now, with everything you found, they won't be able to hide anymore." Richard looked at the names, then at his daughter. "We end this." But before anyone could speak again, a phone buzzed in Evelyn's coat pocket. A message. No sender, just one line. Too late then. The unmistakable sound of tires crunching on gravel outside. Everyone looked up. The black SUV had found them. But this time, Emily didn't run. She stood, reached into her backpack, and pulled out a flash. "Doctor, this," she said, "has everything. Records, videos, logs. I've been collecting it for years." Richard stared in disbelief. "Why didn't you say anything?" Was waiting for the right moment. And then came the final twist. "I didn't send the photo," Emily said. "But I know who did." She turned her phone around and showed them the message that had come in hours earlier. One she hadn't shared yet. It was a video grainy taken from a surveillance camera. In it, a young girl, Lily, was handing the envelope to a man at the post office counter. Lily had sent the photo. Lily had found the truth, and now she was missing. The real fight had just begun. The room fell completely silent after Emily revealed the video. The weight of what they had just discovered crushed the last bit of air between them. Lily had known something. Maybe not everything, but enough to feel that her mother's past mattered. Enough to mail the photo. And now she was gone. Richard's heart was pounding so hard it echoed in his ears. "How long has she been missing?" "An hour," Emily whispered, barely able to say the words. She was supposed to be home right after school. Evelyn's fingers trembled as she grabbed her phone and dialed a secure contact. Glenn locked the barn door and peeked out the back window, watching for movement. Emily had already pulled up tracking software on her device, something she had quietly set up in case of emergencies. Lily's phone was off, but the last location ping showed a nearby warehouse abandoned on the edge of the industrial zone, less than 15 minutes away. They didn't wait. Glenn drove them straight there, headlights off, until the last block. The warehouse stood dark against the gray sky, looming and silent. But a black SUV was parked beside it. They approached on foot. Richard's hands shook as they crept toward a side entrance. Emily took the lead, whispering, "She's in there. I know she is." Inside, the air was cold and damp. Their footsteps echoed faintly on the concrete floor. Stacks of crates lined the walls, but beyond them was a room with a single flickering light. They could hear voices low, tense. A man was speaking, pacing, angry. "She knows nothing. We need to scare her. That's it." Message to the mother. "Amas." Then a girl's voice, small and defiant. "My mom isn't scared of you." Richard's eyes welled with tears. That was Lily. Before they could make a move, Evelyn stepped forward. Pulling out her phone and pressing a button, screeching feedback cut through the warehouse. From speakers hidden in the corners, a distorted voice began playing. "This is Emily Barnes. The files in my possession link members of this group to abductions, falsified police reports, and trafficking. If anything happens to me or my daughter, this information goes live." The voice looped. From outside, the faint sound of sirens grew louder. The man's voice inside turned to panic. "It's a setup, get out." The door burst open. A tall figure darted out, but Glenn tackled him to the ground. Emily ran to the back of the room, where Lily was tied to a chair, unharmed but shaken. She rushed to her daughter and hugged her tight, her whole body shaking with relief. Richard stood frozen for a moment, then walked slowly toward them. He dropped to his knees beside Lily, tears running down his face. "You saved us, sweetheart. I just wanted you to find her," Lily said, looking at him. "You missed her so much." By the time the police arrived, the flash drive had already been uploaded to multiple news outlets. Evelyn had planned the release with trusted journalists in case anything ever happened to them. With Glenn's insider knowledge and the digital trail Emily had built over the years. There was enough evidence to open an immediate federal investigation. The man arrested that night was Harold Quintha, same man who had followed Emily years ago. The files tied him to over a dozen missing persons cases, most involving teens relocated through private channels. Several other suspects were named within days. Some tried to run. Others denied everything. But the damage was done. The system that had erased Emily was finally exposed in the days that followed. Richard and Emily were interviewed by authorities, but more than that, they talked. They sat across from each other on a worn couch, not as father and missing daughter, but as two people trying to understand lost time. Emily told him everything, the loneliness, the fear, the decision to stay hidden. And Richard told her the truth about what it had done to him, how he had spent years clinging to fading memories and unanswered questions. For the first time in over 2 decades, they grieved together. Lily slowly began to ask questions too. She was bright, curious, and brave just like Emily had been at her age. She wanted to know who the people were who had tried to silence the truth. But more than anything, she wanted to know who her grandfather really was. She asked him to read to her at night, and Richard started bringing old photo albums, piecing together their family story, one memory at a time. Evelyn, despite her role in helping Emily vanish, was cleared legally. The truth of what she had done both to protect and deceive was complicated. But she stayed in town, continuing to work with families affected by the same broken systems. She testified during hearings, exposing how corruption had infiltrated both public institutions and private firms. Her voice became a catalyst for change, even as she carried her own guilt. Glenn, too, stepped forward, sharing his story and the documents he had hidden away for years. He had been too scared to act before, but seeing the Barnes family begin to heal gave him the courage to make things right. Weeks turned into months. Emily applied for new legal documents under her real name. Lily returned to school with a little more confidence. Richard began volunteering at a local support group for families of missing persons. And every Sunday, the 3 of them would sit together in the backyard, just talking, catching up on a life they almost lost. One afternoon, while they were planting flowers along the edge of the garden, Lily looked up at her mom. "Do you think it's over now?" Emily paused. She looked at Richard, then at the sky, then back at her daughter. "It's never really over," she said softly. "But we're not hiding anymore." And that was enough. Because after all the years of pain and silence, the truth had found its way through. Not through anger, not through revenge, but through a father who refused to give up. A daughter who chose to fight back. And a child who believed in something as simple as a photograph and a stamp. Their story, once buried under fear and lies, was finally in the light. And for the first time in 22 years, the Barnes family was whole again.